Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a very rainy Friday. I know we all have some big plans. Today's webinar, we've got about 40 minutes planned for you and a few extra minutes at the end to answer your questions. And I just want to encourage you and invite you to use that chat window and to type your questions in. We're going to be taking note of all those questions, and we'll get to them all together as a group at the end of the presentation. Also, if you're having any type of issues or hearing us, or you want to revisit this webinar, it is being recorded, and we're going to have that posted on ccinfo.unc.edu next week. So let me go ahead and start off with some introductions. My name is Kelly Huggins. I'm with Connect Carolina Change Management, and I am joined, I've got a full house here, I'm joined by Chris Lawless, Financial Business Systems Analyst, Robin Burke, she is our Business Systems Manager, Dave Turner, our HR Business Analyst, and our producer today, Chris Minter, also part of our Change Management team. So I assure you, we're going to get some answers to your questions. Today we are going to talk about the modifications to the funding grid. And very soon you'll be able to enter your funding sources as a % of total compensation. But if you like entering them as dollar amounts, you can still do that. We're not taking anything away. All of our modifications to the funding grid are enhancements, and nothing's been eliminated. So I think that when you sign in on Monday, you'll see the regular funding grid. It has a very familiar feel, and we've just got a few things that are going to hopefully make it easier for you. The most notable one being that you can enter either a % or a dollar now. Oops. Like I mentioned, this will happen over the weekend. They're going to run some things tonight, October 2nd, so when you come in Monday, you'll be able to see those changes. Many of you might be asking, why are we doing this? Why are we making these changes? Well, definitely, this is taking us one step closer to eliminating VA lockouts. I know everybody is excited about that. We're not there yet. I want to just be clear, but we are moving in that direction, and this was a big step. The second thing, of course, this allows our system to distribute our payroll a bit more accurately. And also the goal is to help the users, and we are trying to do that by saving you time when you have to enter funding or make any changes to those funding amounts and funding sources. Sometimes there can be some data entry errors there, and this will save you time. The modifications will hit the funding grid as a whole, so that means you'll see them on all the ePARs that have the funding grid. That includes your hire, your edit existing job, or some people like to refer to that as job change, the add update position ePAR, the funding swap, and the lump sum payment ePAR as well. So it'll be a universal thing. All dollars or all %. One of the things that you will just have to keep in mind is once you decide the format that you want to use on your funding grid, if you want to start entering funding amounts as dollars, then you have to continue entering the amounts as dollars for the rest of the rows on that grid. Likewise, if you wanted to start with percentages, and you entered a % for a particular funding source, then you have to continue entering percentages for all the rest of the rows on that funding grid. If you happen to have multiple grids on one ePAR, each time you can make that decision. So you can use dollars on one grid and percentages on the other. One of the other things that we want to just kind of throw out there for you all to keep in mind is that sometimes you'll still want to use the dollar amount as your primary way of entering the funding amounts on the grid. So there are 3 reasons we can think of. One, when your faculty and staff, they have supplements or they have stipends that equal a specific dollar amount. So this is like with any of your training grants or your fellowships. where the funding agency is awarded a specific stipend level. You'll want to start on the grid. You can enter that dollar amount, sort of force that amount to hit that particular funding source, so you don't have to worry about making that an adjustment with a percentage or anything. The second case where you might want to start with entering and keeping it as a dollar amount is anyone who has had a funding row assigned an RNF earn code. So this is again tied to most of your stipends. It has to do with the postdocs, where they are exempt from FICA. And I don't believe that this is actually a big change, so that's sort of the same thing. And then the third case where you may still want to enter your funding as a dollar amount would be, of course, for those individuals who have salaries over the NIH salary cap, and we're talking about the cost sharing here. So those three cases, you might want to still use the dollar amount on the funding grid. In addition to being able to enter amounts either as dollars or percentages, we've got a new helpful tool. It's called the Reconcile Button, and that'll be at the bottom of the grid. And if you have those employees that have multiple rows of funding, and you're entering a lot of amounts, and it gets very detailed, and you're off just by, a few pennies, it's very convenient to have this button at the end where you can hit it, and it'll take care of making those very small adjustments so that your unfunded amount at the bottom of your funding grid equals 0, and you would be able to proceed on to the next step of the ePAR. So one thing to keep in mind with this funding tool, the Reconcile Button, is that it will make the adjustments to the last row of funding that appeared on the last row when you first navigated to the funding grid. So if you have, let's just say, somebody who has 12 to 15 lines of funding, and you've gone through and you've made a few changes, you're off by just 10 cents or so, and you'd like to maybe sort your funding rows in a particular way, ascending or descending order, however you organize them. And then you use the Reconcile Button. That small adjustment will be made to the row of funding that was originally the last line on the funding grid when you first navigated to it. So that might not be a very, that might not have a huge impact. I'm not sure how many people sort their rows, but just keep in mind that it is for the last row when you first navigate there. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of your new choices here. So when we are on the Add Update Positioned ePAR, one of the new fields there, it's called Allocated Budget Amount. This is an amount that, this is a field where you can enter a dollar amount that's used as a reference for this position when you don't have an incumbent sitting there. So let's walk through the form. Here we will come to the funding grid. We're creating a new position, never created, it's a new position, brand new. So you're going to come to a blank funding grid. Once you enter in an amount in the allocated budget amount, I popped in 50,000 here. Then I can drop down to the grid and I can start to enter the funding. At this point, I have a choice, right? I can enter the budget amount as a dollar, or I can put it in as a % of distribution. So in this example, I'm putting in 40%, and then I'll tab out, and the system automatically takes 40% of the amount I put in the allocated budget amount field earlier, and then it filled in $20,000 for the budget amount. And then my cursor is sitting over there in the combo code field, and I would fill the grid out as normal, entering my sources. Again, no big change here. You're going to add a second row just by hitting that Add a Row plus sign, that button over on the left. pops in a new field. One of the things you want to take a look at, though, is remember I started entering this as a percentage, so I'm going to have to finish the grid by entering the next row of funding as a percentage. So I'll pop in 50%. I'll tab out of that. The computer automatically takes 50% of the allocated budget amount. It fills in $25,000 for that budget amount on row 2. And just like we always do, we'll continue to add rows so that the unfunded amount on the bottom of the grid equals 0. So you can see I now have 5,000. I still need to enter information in this last third row. And at this point, my unfunded amount is 0 now, and I would be able to proceed. So no big change there. How about if I'm creating a new position, but I'm going to do so by copying the position that has an incumbent sitting in it. So when I go to create a new position, I'll go to the Add Update Position ePAR. I'll click on Create New Position. I'll use the copy feature. I'll put in the position number. And when I go ahead and navigate to the funding grid, the allocated budget amount at the top is 0. I am creating a new position, so that's fine. But it's pulling the percentage of distribution and the combo codes that the incumbent has sitting on the position I copied. So if I truly wanted to copy this position, I'd probably want to copy the funding sources and information. So this is just giving me a head start with the data entry here. If this new position I'm creating, I want to designate $40,000, I will type that in the allocated budget amount field. Remember, this is not encumbering any funds. This is just a designation. I'm just going to go ahead and earmark. This is $40,000 for this job. And then when I tab out of that field, the system will automatically drop down on the grid, use the existing percent of distribution that it pulled in, and it will do the math for us and calculate all the budget amounts for the existing rows of funding there. So that's a big time saver. If you need one of the funding rows to be a specific amount on the grid, you just leave that allocated budget amount field blank and you start changing the row of funding on the grid first. And then you go back up to the allocated budget amount field. So again, if we're going to use the same example as before, we want to set a fixed dollar amount. Right now I'm still on the Add Update Position funding grid, but this works the same for all the funding grids on the Hire ePAR or the Edit Existing Job ePAR. Anytime you want to sort of mandate a certain amount to hit a funding source, start working on the grid first. Find that row of funding, pop in your budget amount, and then when you tab out of that, if you do go back up, at this point you can put in the allocated budget amount, and then when you drop back down to the grid, you start entering dollar amounts for the rest of the funding. At this point, you can see the only editable field here, the column, is the budget amount. So I started entering a dollar amount. I'm going to have to continue entering dollar amounts on this grid. And the computer is just going to go ahead and calculate the percent of distribution. So instead of adding a row in this example, I want to remove this third row. Again, no big change. We have a lot of functions that are remaining the same. We're going to click on that minus button to get rid of that funding. And then, oh, take a look at that. I am 50 cents off. So visually, I've got that information down there at the bottom where it says new total, percent, unfunded amount. You'll see that in red. That's visually a sign that you need to take a look. And then I can see that I'm off. I still have 50 cents I haven't funded. This is something I could very easily go in and I could just retype in the budgeted amount on one of the rows of funding. But if it's such a small amount, and that's what the Reconcile button is designed for, to help you with any of these rounding sort of issues, you can just click on that and it will adjust the bottom line. Oops. It always will adjust the bottom line. Again, it's the one that when you first navigated to the funding grid, so if you sorted the rows, that original row may no longer be in the bottom position, but I went ahead and clicked on it, and you can now see that that bottom row funding is an even $27,500, and my unfunded amount is 0. Everything along that bottom line is in black, and I am ready to proceed. Something else that's new, we've got 2 new columns that you'll see on some of the ePARs. So this wasn't something we talked about, but if you'll take a look on the higher ePAR or the edit existing job ePARs, this is a great way where you can see side to side the information about the old amount people were being paid compared to the new amount. So this is an example of the new hire ePAR. I'm hiring someone into a position, and it's automatically going to, when I navigate to the funding grid, I haven't entered in how much this person is going to make yet, but you can see on the funding grid, it is pulling information. That old budget amount, the old percent of distribution, that's either pulling from the amount that someone placed on the position when they created it, or maybe the last incumbent that was sitting in this position. I'll go ahead and enter the new amount that I'm going to hire the person at, $55,000. And you can see when I tab out of that, it updates the budget amount and the percent of distribution. Also, if you take a look at the bottom left corner, you can see the old amounts and the new total. Another example, if I wanted to mandate a certain amount on a certain funding source, I would go to the grid first. Notice that I don't have anything up there in the annual rate. I'm going to go to the grid. I'm going to hit the plus sign to add a few rows there, and I can type in the dollar amount that I want to hit on each funding source. Now, if you look at the bottom of this grid, and on this example, you'll see my unfunded amount is a negative $55,000. That's just because I haven't put the amount up in the annual rate. Once I go back up and I enter that 55 in the annual rate field, I hit the Reconcile button, everything turns to black. Notice I did click on the delete checkbox for each of the old rows of funding information. So it's going to pop in the 3 new rows with the dollar amounts. Again, I don't think that's a big change. For the edit existing job ePAR, just as you would expect, the funding grid fills in with the current salary information for the incumbent. And if you change the annual rate, the current percent of distribution will apply to the new amount. So let's take a look at that. This person was making $48,000. You can see that in the bottom left corner. You can also see it in the old budget amount, the old percent of distribution. That was 100% was hitting that funding source. Once I typed in that this person is going to start making $50,000, it's going to apply 100%. Reminders, use the Add a Row button and the Delete checkbox to change the distribution of the new budget amount and the funding sources. And if you need one of the funding rows to be a specific amount on the grid, edit the row of funding on the grid first, and then go back and enter the amount in the annual rate field. The funding swap and the lump sum payment ePARs, just like the other ePARs, these funding grids will let you enter funding as a dollar amount or percentage. So just in summary, what you'll see when you come into work on Monday on the funding grid, you'll have fields that will allow you to enter funding in two different formats, either dollars or percentages. You'll see two new columns on some of the grids where you'll be able to compare the old budget amount and the old percent of distribution with the new amounts. There'll be a Reconcile button on the bottom of the grid that will help you with some rounding calculations. And the new Allocate Budget Amount field on the Add Update ePAR is a reference tool that will be used when there's no incumbent and you're placing funding on the position level. Key points for you to remember: if you enter a percent on one of the rows of funding on the grid, you'll have to continue using that format for the rest of the grid. Likewise, if you enter dollar amounts, you'll have to continue entering dollar amounts for each row of funding. And then, in some cases, you'll want to continue entering your funding sources and your funding amounts with a dollar format. And that's when the salary is over the NIH cap, you have stipends or supplements that you need to key in a specific dollar amount and you can't go over, or you have any rows that have that RNF earning code, usually with post-ups. I want to just open it up now, see if Chris can help us out and let us know if there have been any questions coming in.
Sure. Just go ahead and type your questions in the chat window. It should be in the left-hand corner of your screen, and I'll read the question off, and Kelly or the other folks in the room will try to give you an answer.
If you guys want to type any feedback about what you think about the change, if you think that this has been it'll be helpful with your data entry or make things easier, feel free. We'll take all your comments as well.
And again, this is meant to be a choice. If you prefer to enter by dollars, we've left that. If you prefer by percentages, you know that someone needs to be paid exactly 25%, 30%, and the remaining on state funds, you no longer have to do all the calculations first before you enter. You can type it in exactly as the percentages.
No questions so far?
Cricket so far, but also another reminder while you're thinking of all your questions. We will be posting this webinar online, probably be early next week sometime, and it'll be there with sound and everything. So if you want to refer to it for like any kind of instruction about how it's going to go, you can watch the webinar again.
I'm taking this as a good sign.
Where everyone's been flooded out.
All right, we're going to stay on this for a few more, in a minute or two, so if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap things up.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that y'all have a great weekend in spite of the rain. And y'all are just PeopleSoft experts. Thank you very much. And feel free to call us at any time, change management team, if you have additional questions. And like Chris mentioned, this will be posted on the website along with the slides. Thanks. Have a good weekend.